This is Nye speaking. Welcome to the book club. As Atlas Shrugged is a mystery novel, and since we have participants with various levels of familiarity concerning the mystery, it's necessary to establish a few terms for its discussion. Those of you who have read beyond Part 2 or have directly breached its contents through external means, consider yourselves bound by the oaths therein with the full knowledge of their applications to this purpose. Those of you who would confess little to no knowledge of the above, yet have been immersed in the objectivist milieu through lectures, articles, or other references, you likely know more than you realize, which I intend to make clear to you in this address. I encourage you to share your input and collaborate on the topic of the mystery. It must consist solely in the products of your own mind, from the text parsed by your own eyes, from the chapters within the club's current range. And in the course of reading, you'll find new connections, new guesses, or new conclusions. Be certain that no part of them was gleaned from outside sources before you share. And for the uninitiated, just be mindful of crossing into either of those two categories, and otherwise your unrestrained reactions and speculations are not only encouraged, but genuinely needed for the motive power of the discussions. My primary purpose in this is to hear the perspectives of other people who appreciate the story. I'm sure you guys have largely the same motivation. So with lengthy monologues out of the way, that is for the time being at least, shall we start with Eddie Willers in Chapter 1?
Hell yeah. Let's see.
With that in mind, I have to say the book sucks. I hate it.
That's too bad. I guess we'll have to throw you out.
You must be evicted from the Gulch.
Casimir, have you finished Fountainhead yet?
Yeah, of course. And in fact, I would
Awesome.
I would want to start comparing Chapter 1 of Fountainhead with this Chapter 1.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that I preferred the Fountainhead starting because it shows us one character and we grow to empathize with that character. Whereas here, it's a bit more spread out. You have characters presented that are a little bit sympathetic, empathetic, but and some others that are not, and so it's a whole big mix, a mess. There's a lot of things going on in one chapter. So I thought it was, at least at first glance, first read, a little bit muddied. But I did like the descriptions of the world. There's a lot of painting with words that's going on here.
Yeah, go ahead. You're just a little bit quiet in my ear.
Okay. So on that note, I think I definitely agree with what you said about Chapter 1, but Chapter 2, I felt, or I haven't finished the Fountainhead, but I thought that Chapter 2 was more reflective of the beginning of the Fountainhead, where we were just focusing on Hank Rearden. And I felt like the moments where Hank Rearden was confident of his work, in fact, reminded me of Rourke, but then when he was around his family, that reminded me of Keating. So I found my home in Chapter 2.
Yeah, I agree that there's a lot packed into these chapters, so it can come across as, I guess, less streamlined, less straightforward than the Fountainhead. Although I would say, like, if we cut out Eddie Willers and we just had Dagny, her perspective in Chapter 1, and then Rearden in Chapter 2, that would pretty much mirror the Fountainhead with Rourke and Keating. So I think it's this choice to have Eddie Willers be our first character that's maybe creating that effect. So I do wonder what you guys thought about Eddie Willers.
Yeah, sorry, I was going to say, like, he doesn't...
Oh, you go, Zulu.
Yeah, okay. He doesn't seem like, you know, any sort of Arandian hero, though he's not as terrible as some of the others. You know, he's at the very least on Dagny's side that they need to fix the Rio Norte line. But he seems a little bit more meek than some of the more hero characters.
He seems like, to me, like he acts like sort of some of my friends who know I'm an objectivist, but don't actually know the philosophy on their own. So they have intuitions, say, aligned with what you have to do. For example, Eddie knew that he should advocate them buying rail from Hank Reardon because he had Dagny in his life. But at the same time, he doesn't view everything with that lens, and he doesn't have the same level of confidence.
Yeah, I think lack of confidence could be the linchpin of, at least as far as we can see in his character.
Yep, he describes an ambiguous, like a shapeless apprehension that's been haunting him, and he identifies this with a memory from his childhood, the symbol of the oak tree that was his anchor and his symbol of strength and stability. And then it was struck by lightning, and he realized that it was rotten at the core. And actually, there's that exact same metaphor in Fountainhead. I just recalled that since we're reading this back to back. But yeah, and then afterwards, we get him entering the Taggart building, and that's like his new anchor is the Taggart building and the industry that he's been a part of for his whole adult life.
And apparently it is, if not completely rotten, at least getting there.
I'd just like to throw something in there about Eddie Willers briefly. It would seem that he's kind of portraying someone who lacks the self-esteem, specifically in the self-assertiveness department, as Nathaniel Brandon would categorize it, because Rand says self-esteem a lot, but he went further to describe what those 6 pillars are, or he divided into 6 pillars and described it. It would appear that maybe Eddie Willers has virtues worth noting, because it's evident his character is not a bad guy, but he lacks the self-assertiveness to push like Dagny would.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder, there's like this sense we're getting from like Eddie and also from Dagny, where they just seemingly can't really understand, or maybe not Dagny, but Reardon, where they can't really understand the motivations behind these second-handers, I suppose you'd call them. Like when Eddie was a kid, it was saying that he couldn't understand why it was self-evident to him that somebody should be doing what is best, and he couldn't understand why on earth anybody would think any other way. And Reardon seems to have like a similar sort of not understanding why on earth people would act in any other way.
I think that's very similar to what Rand describes as like everybody has a philosophy, whether it's consciously or unconsciously integrated. And in this moment, it would seem like these guys are, well, at least Eddie Willers is more on the unconsciously integrated philosophy. Reardon, I don't know if I could say that as firmly about him, but Eddie Willers would seem to fall in that category of that the type of person who's integrated their beliefs without actually validating them.
There is this other theme I wanted to bring attention to, this sort of like passing the buck to other people that we see. Like we see it with Jim Taggart, who's like never wanting to take any responsibility for anything. It's like, no, I didn't say that. It's like, okay, so the negation of that. Oh no, I didn't say that either. And we need the board's approval for all of these things. Just never willing to take a stand on anything. And then the same thing with the people on the railroad. Nobody's seemingly willing to stand up for these things, except for Dagny. She seems to be, all right, if you're not going to stick your neck out, I'll stick out for you. I'll take the responsibility then. Which I believe maybe that is where the Atlas comes in. Atlas is, I haven't actually read the story of Atlas, but supposedly he holds the earth up on his shoulders, so maybe Dagny's doing a similar thing here with the company, and Reardon is holding like his ungrateful family on his shoulders. But maybe that'll be proven to be entirely wrong as the book goes on. But certainly something
I
to
think that's
come back to.
I think it's good. I think what you just got out there was pretty spot on.
But the question is, the
Granted,
question in
I've
that
read
chapter,
it still.
the question in that chapter with the railroad is who's ultimately who's supposed to be responsible, who trained that crew, functional, that people can't make decisions they're supposed to be making at the ground level, and so a decision maker has to come in a surprising manner, and sort of solve the situation. It means that the company itself is rotten, that decisions are not delegated to the people who are supposed to be making them, and therefore it only functions properly when this consciousness appears that can actually make decisions, and it sort of shines the light of reason on this particular moment, and then provides a clarity of answer. But in a company that's properly established, uh, all of those responsibilities would be outlined, and people would be able to make the calls. So the fact they can't make the calls is not necessarily their failure. Possibly it's the failure of where they work.
Yeah, I think we get.
Yeah, I think that's.
Sorry. Yeah, I think we get some of that with what's his face, Jim Taggart. He's like saying like, oh no, you have to be going through like the proper departments, and there's this whole like ugly bureaucracy. It's Eddie just wants to cut straight through it and go, hey Jim, this is a problem, it needs solved. It's like, well no, you got to go through the proper channels and everything. It's strangling.
This reminds me of something. There is a concept that I remember from people used to play online competitive games, and one of the requirements was very instantaneous, very fast communication. You had to explain complex problems immediately, so like what the other team was doing, what the problem is, and then convey that to your teammates, provide a solution, and then have the teammates execute it, and then you would potentially win a match. So like in a I don't know, something analogy somebody can understand, like in a game of soccer, you would have to like call out who's getting the pass and then perform the pass and then would secure the goal. And so the most sort of elementary level of communication is identifying a problem and then not offering a solution. So like saying, well, we're stuck, and not offering a solution. And the next level of communication would be saying, we're stuck, I can get us unstuck, I'm going to do it, is anyone against me? And then if nobody says anything opposing that, then making the decision and taking the responsibility for the action. And that's sort of the second level of competition and teamwork, where people start taking responsibility for actions. And then the ultimate level of competition is when they don't need to communicate, because they have sort of operated, and the level of trust in the operation is so high that people just take initiative and sort of smile at each other. Yeah, I'm doing it, and everybody's smiling back, and you execute. And that's what we see in the second chapter when we see the steel pouring operation. There's no people shouting orders. People are just doing their job because it's already established, and people know what they're supposed to achieve, and they're achievers within their small realm that encompasses that entire company. And so that's what you have. That's the level of dysfunction that you see in the contrasting scene, is that they even have to ask for permission. They have to go through, as you say, the bureaucracy. Whereas on the top level of the competition, you don't. The communication is sort of implicit. It's already there. It's established as part of the operation.
Yeah, during the scene
I've got 2
where
points for that. Oh wait.
I was just gonna point out that like during the scene where the Reardon metal is first poured, there's literally like nobody is speaking except for the 3 people that are, or I think it was like the journalist and the economics professor, and each one of them, they're the only ones speaking, yet they're the only ones that are contributing at production of the Reardon.
Well, yes, it's identified as like a city with no people, and in part it's because it seems that way from the outside. But really, we do see people operating within it, like the person operating the crane, and picking stuff up and pouring stuff and performing the actual operations. They just don't need to talk about it because the talk is the conversation, the communication indicates that there's something to communicate. But in a perfect system, there is no need to communicate because everybody knows their job already. Everything is well oiled. And so I'm not saying that you can straight up jump into that system, but that's the ultimate sort of point where people take responsibility for actions, so that even communication becomes unnecessary because there's mutual trust on all levels and mutual sort of level of knowledge of the local system and its part in the greater whole that doesn't need to be communicated anymore because everybody's trusting everybody to do the right thing. But it's only possible because they've established that culture and they've hired, experts on every level.
Yeah, I think that's
Actually, I just
sorry.
had a connection. The scene where a person shows up to resign, he cannot communicate why he's leaving. Partly, perhaps because it's not. It's one of those things where, like, he can't explain to a person why their system is broken, because it would be akin to establishing the whole system from the grounds up. Like, it's almost pointless for him to say why he's leaving.
Well, he does
Yes.
say that it's nothing to do with his job, so I mean, maybe he's lying, but I think we can take him at his word there.
Context for the ending of chapter 1 there is so Dagny, to your point, Casimir, she does like identify what's going on here with this particular problem on the everyone was stuck in the tunnel on the siding and nobody knew who was in charge or wanted to be in charge. She identified that the branch manager of Ohio, I think she said, was a friend of James Taggart and didn't deserve to be in his position. So she was looking for a replacement, which was going to be this guy that just quit at the end of the chapter. So there's a lack of capable people in the company that she's able to promote. So she has to go looking for people who are younger and less experienced. And even then, it seems she's coming up short.
Yes, but I think that you're right, that maybe it's not the company itself, but the external world that's causing that occasion to occur. But also you have so much evidence of like the problems in that company from within the chapter, and the comparison you get almost instantly, that you should conclude that you just can't. I mean, the person doesn't have any problem with his work, but what should he say? Your company is the problem. I don't have a problem with your company because I'll just do my job. But maybe he's not capable of like fully expressing his capabilities as a human in that company, even though it has no inherent he has no inherent problem with it.
I don't know, maybe we'll see more of the Kellogg fella and be able to know more about his motivations. I'm not sure if we have it. Like, this might just, rather than being a symptom of the rot, maybe this is the cause of the rot. That good people are just not interested in staying around for whatever reason.
Yeah, I got a couple things to say to some of what you guys said. I think, as you guys were like mentioning bureaucracy, I think Rand does a really good job at like portraying that in the Fountainhead near the end. Spoiler alert for anybody that's not caught up on the Fountainhead. When the oh my god, what is the final building or the final
Portland.
apartment buildings? In Portland, when they're when they get altered and Peter goes back like begging to find out why, who, she describes it as a faceless bureaucracy, which is like the word bureaucracy obviously describes it, but to say faceless, I think further emphasizes the point that like shit happens, nobody's directly attributable to it. And she does a good job here too, illustrating the same thing. Oh my god, there was another point I was going to connect that to. I forgot it. I don't know.
Just everyone like passing responsibility onto others, maybe.
Oh, I'm sorry, I remembered. Okay, so I was actually going to try and jump into Jim Taggart's character because he was doing that, right, as you guys described. But I think like the actual sin, or in objective terms, the vice that he was portraying is that he was outsourcing his judgment of the value of Reardon metal to others. Like, yeah, he was trying to just be your casual bureaucrat, but he wasn't even willing to evaluate the metal on his own merit. He was just outsourcing his judgment to other people. That is the like specific vice that I thought was interesting, that you get from this kind of bureaucracy.
Yeah, it's like
Which-
nobody's using it yet, so therefore we shouldn't be using it.
Which vice in particular is that in the objectivist literature?
I mean, I don't know that she's like, I don't know how she would word it, but she would certainly be against the idea that you outsource your judgment to other people. She would expect you to evaluate it on your own merit and to come to a rational conclusion as to whether it's the correct thing to proceed upon or not.
It'd be a
For
form
sure,
of
I'm just
second-handedness, surely.
Oh, and the key term for this book, I don't think I'm spoiling anything just yet. We're no longer going to use second-handers. Now they're parasites. There's a couple other terms, but she's much more harsh about how she how she describes these people this time. Speaking of harsh, do you guys remember how she described Jim Taggart?
Yeah, he was like, he like kept peering over his forehead and stuff, like hunched over.
There were some abstract things. I liked the way she described, and this is just an aside, when she described the guy on the train who was humming the Richard Halley theme, or the quote-unquote Richard Halley theme. She said that his muscles had a tightness that evaded, or his muscles were tight, rather than loose, evading the responsibility of his shape. I think it's so funny how she describes people, but that's an aside.
Oh, yeah.
I don't remember exactly what she said about Jim Taggart, but it was funny.
I do remember. So Jim Taggart, she said, I forget exactly what feature, but the meaning was that his face looked as if he had transitioned directly from adolescence into middle age without any period of age. And then we get the direct contrast with Hank Reardon, where it's like he's got these hard lines on his face that made him look old when he was young, and young now that he's older.
Yeah, that's awesome, and that's hilarious. But that is great. I don't know how to characterize what I find so great about those contrasts in these descriptions, but I at least get some humor from the first one. Actually, no, there's obviously like a heroic element to the way she's describing Reardon, right? There's a heroism to it. Same thing with Dominique when she's first introduced. It says something about she possessed like a certain type of feminine elegance that wasn't like it didn't look like it should be associated with the current setting she was in on that train.
Me and Dagny.
What did I just say? Did I say Dominique?
Yeah, you said Dominic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's Rand's fault. Why'd she start with D's for both of them? And then for Hank and Howard, it's also H's. Like, you know. No, it's probably just coincidental. But you're right. Yeah, sorry, Dagny.
Don't name names. I don't.
Yeah, Dagny had quite, I think, a good description, but even better than her initial description, I think. Well, actually, first of all, what she did with Dagny is you don't learn her name. So you just get the pronoun she for like half the chapter, and then you get Dagny Taggart when she's asked her name. I think that was pretty good. So it's even symbolically saying her decisions about the railroad don't have to do with her authority per se. They have to do with what she knows. So her name wasn't the most important thing. But then also her posture is like a big motif in the chapter, where like James Taggart's hunched over, shifty eyes looking down to the corner. Dagny is sitting on the arm of the chair, and he says nobody attends meetings this way. I do. He's just like, I think of when I was learning violin, the instructor said, sit on the edge of your seat. Don't sit with your back to the seat, because there's just this energetic focus you get from being on the edge of your seat, straight up, leaning forward, and that's what Rand described with Dagny.
Yeah, I love these aesthetic descriptions she goes into. I also liked when Dagny was on the train. Sorry, you guys are hearing all that noise. I liked when she was on the train. She was describing the rhythm of the train. There's like just a romantic element. She's romanticizing the experience itself of being on that train, which I guess is reflective of Dagny's appreciation for her work, and maybe some other things. But do you guys recall what I'm talking about? Where she describes almost like a musical element of the train
Yeah.
going over every like
Well,
fourth something.
Yeah, every fourth
Yeah.
like turn around of the wheels, it was accented.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a way of making something so simple and possibly mundane as riding a train sound very exciting, and it just romanticizes it. It makes it, you could visualize it. You could see it in a movie. I'd be very curious how they did that in the
Well,
Atlas
that's
Shrugged movie, but who knows?
that's an interesting assertion there. I liked it that you said it. There's no trade ride. There's no train ride or walk outside that's really mundane. So if it's something is mundane, it's because you've allowed it to be mundane. It's because you have that perspective. It's because you are, or possibly like from the this is like a quality of second-handers and the quality of people that aren't really living life. They're sort of like going through motions. They're following instructions, but they're not engaging with life. And so, they don't walk outside and say, "Oh, this is a really high resolution image I'm getting," and so they don't appreciate what they're seeing. And so the train ride, there's no like train ride that's really featureless unless you're really riding through the desert. If you're riding through the United States, it'll clearly be of interest. But you can make it mundane if you maybe repeat it often enough, and if you become uncurious enough about what you're seeing or focused on other things. So then
Certainly.
I also took it that Daphne liked this sound so much. One, because it's taking her to a destination which she has a purpose in going to. And the other reason is that I think she takes pride in taking part in building of the rails themselves.
Yeah. Casimir, you also just made me remember something we talked about, I think, on our last book club meeting for the Fountainhead, how, at least in my experience, just like through reading Rand, it gives me a second appreciation. It makes me take a second look at what I'm doing. Like I described before, if I was raised in the city of Chicago, but as a child, I took it for granted. As an adult, I'm just mind blown. You can look at anything and ponder it forever. It's like, dude, somebody really built that. Somebody drew that on a piece of paper. I think you hit on something that's really cool that we brought up before.
Yeah. Also, the bum at the very start that was presented as like this shadow of a human, not even possibly human, who was presented as somebody who has given up, but yet their face is very close in the description to Reardon himself, which is indicating that even like the lowest bum begging for money in the street in that society is somebody who has the potential to be a Reardon, and it is merely our sort of the difference between somebody who surrendered and somebody who didn't, and it is that surrender that is the problem that's making them into a shadow of themselves. Whereas if they don't surrender, they're not necessarily guaranteed to be a Reardon, but they are guaranteed an exciting life, and they can find positions. But it requires sort of a difference in attitude, and a certain resilience. A society of great adversity.
Which aspect of the bum's face did you identify as similar to Reardon's?
Well, she's describing it towards like the very end of that encounter as having like a sort of a worn out face with filled with lines, but with live eyes that gaze back and indicate that there's like a very strong soul within them. And so it's a person that that has clearly is not like is not there because they have no capacity for action, but it's there because they have given up. They've given up hope that they've given up that anything can be achieved. So they've become a beggar. But their face indicates that they actually could have achieved, that they had the potential if they didn't give up.
Yeah,
That's a great point, Casimir. Sorry, go ahead.
I think the words in particular were a cynical and exhausted intelligence in the eyes. And I forget if that was the bum. That might have been Pop Harper, who's the old man near the end of chapter 1.
I've got the quote for the bum. So it says the face was wind-browned, cut by lines of weariness and cynical resignation. The eyes were intelligent, and it also says that he said, "Who is John Galt?" simply without expression. So that is also, I suppose, similar to Reardon.
Kind of just like a living dead man. The soul is still intact, but
Yeah, but
he's-
better than the shadow, than the surrounding shadows that don't even have a face, don't have a history.
Well, it does say that the bum is a shadow that had no face.
Yes, until it was revealed a face. Exactly.
I do think
It's funny
one of the
how-
reasons why Eddie Willers is the focus perspective character at the beginning is that the information we get through his eyes is a description of the setting as like a more regular person would see it. So we get more of a down-to-earth view of this twilight that he's feeling, this apprehension. And there's something in there that I thought was very well, like very subtly put, is he's walking by the shops and he likes seeing the shops because they're a sign of productivity and growth in the midst of this twilight and the bums. But he says like only every fourth shop was closed down. And so it's to him in that moment, the fact that every fourth shop is closed is a good sign. Like that's better than usual. So it does give us an idea of the setting.
I suppose it could be maybe indicative that the book is less focused on like a Howard Rourke against a Peter Keating, and more on the world itself, because Eddie Willers is not like, he doesn't feel like a big moving character, you know, more on the sidelines, and we're getting multiple sort of Rourke-esque characters already. So maybe the focus isn't on them, but rather on the world that they inhabit.
Kind of depicting a decaying world with heroes in it. Yeah, for sure.
There's this other symbol from the Eddie Willers portion, which is the calendar that's put on a large tower, like a clock tower, except with the days of the month instead of the time of day. And the first time I saw that, that was sort of an odd decision to me. Like, I didn't really understand the significance of this calendar. It seemed almost out of place. So, what do you guys make of the calendar symbol?
Well, I do have one thing I noticed about it, is that when he sees the character, it's saying that he's trying to, he was groping for a sentence that hung in his mind as an empty shape. And then later, when he's talking to the guy with the typewriter, he says, "You're ready for the junk pile, old pal, your days are numbered." And that is apparently the sentence that Eddie was trying to remember. So I'm not sure what exactly it means to look at a calendar and think your days are numbered. But I think that's the connection there.
Your days are numbered, as in they have numbers.
That's a good point.
But there's
That part, I'm sorry. Was that in chapter 1? Did you say that?
Yeah, so Eddie Willer, there's this calendar that's like a clock tower, and I think he makes a comment like,
Well, that, yeah, okay, but keep going.
men look up. No, actually, this was my interpretation, so I shouldn't say that. But yeah, and he's grasping for this phrase. Like, things are slipping Eddie's mind all the time. It's this cloud of this mood of uncertainty we get with him. But he remembers the phrase, but then when he remembers it, he doesn't know what it was referring to, why he was trying to remember in the first place, but it was referring to that calendar. He was trying to think of the phrase, "Your days are numbered." And the way it's used by the Pop Harper, it's in the context of that whole paragraph of him saying, like, it's no use, it's useless, why are we even trying? Well, I'm not even going to replace this typewriter, like all of the modern typewriters are no good. It's that type of attitude.
What do you guys think of, if I'm not switching topics too quickly, what do you guys think of the way she depicts these parasites or second-handers? They're a little more straightforward, like right off the bat in this one. Obviously, like I said, I guess they're kind of she's portraying like this decaying world, but I think the way these characters come on and exposing their identities and their philosophies they hold, it's a lot more straightforward than you get in the Fountainhead. It's just like his mom's are clearly a vile person. Jim Taggart is. I would have loved to just like slam his head against the desk when he was speaking. These characters are immediately just they're insufferable.
Yeah, that's why I said the book sucks. It's too crude.
I mean, we already have a book
Punch
about
Jim
the
Taggart.
downfall of the second-hander with Keating. I'm not sure we need 2 books on that.
Hope.
There are other topics, you know.
What do you think about like some of the things his mom says? The way how like she obviously understands she's benefiting from him monetarily, from Hank Reardon, that is, and I'm trying to remember some of the exact statements, but like it's clear that she has no gratitude towards that and tries to make him feel guilty for his work, his love, which actually they focus on quite a bit, right? Like she tries to make him feel guilty for his virtues, and when he hands his wife, who also had a funny description, she was like all but beautiful until she described her face.
Yeah.
But when he gave her the Reardon medal, she was just so indifferent to it. Again, just discarding this man's virtues. And I think there was even like a quote in there about like he didn't understand why they loved him because they didn't love him for any of the reasons he'd want to be loved. It was something along those lines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think
attacking him for his virtues.
Like, I almost hate the wife more than the mother, because at least the mother's open and honest about it, you know, as honest as you could be in that situation. But the wife is just so like underhanded and like duplicitous. It's like, ugh, why'd you marry that?
Right, like her fake compliments, basically, of his gift to her.
Mhm.
For example, it's so much worse than just insulting it.
Yeah, the way she even sets it up is like she describes it as she makes a comparison. What was the analogy when he gifted it to her?
It would be just as valuable as the stuff that railroad tracks are made out of.
No, like when it's not like said by a character. It's just the way when he hands it to her, she compares it to like a man handing oh my god,
A crusader. It was a crusader bringing back a trophy.
Yes, thank you, Nye. She sets it up as this like amazing thing. I'm sorry if you guys hear that banging. My house is being worked on. What's it called? She sets it up as this like beautiful scene. This epic scene. There's a lot of I don't know what exactly I would characterize it, but she sets it up in a way that the disappointment is profound once Lillian actually gets it.
It's crushing reading this chapter. There's this phrase that that Reardon only felt loneliness when he was happy. So that's something to think about. Double A, what do you make of this relationship? What should Reardon do? What's your advice?
Dating advice time? Well, he should tell them to all fuck off. That's really it. They're leeches on him, and if he continues to associate with all of these, they are going to drive him into destruction. He should go and try and find people who are appreciative of his virtues. And in fact, he'll find work so much easier that way.
I think it's interesting how in 2 stories in a row written by Rand, there is a dysfunctional, initially at least, dysfunctional family, and dysfunctional love stories and dysfunctional characters, where none of them are raising children, none of them are educating their children, and in fact, all the familial relationships are almost in the Molyneux style accidental biological cage territory, with the booing is the only solution.
I think you and I are the only ones who know what that. Oh no, Nye watched Molyneux.
I'll explain. It's this idea that every family traditionally is so dysfunctional that you must reject it and reject your parents. It's sort of almost a cult call, and I think that it's partially true, but taken to the extreme. There's always people in your family that could be second-handers and destructive, but that doesn't mean that you should either be reliant on them or supporting them or also totally isolating from them. You could also be neutral to them and not be as affected. And also, you should be building your own family. So it is interesting that there are these characters that they're building their lives. They're going from working in the mines, working over a single small enterprise, saving it, and then establishing a whole empire. But they don't have a family with children that they are educating to be good people. So they're failing in that aspect of humanity, and I think that's a flaw that we see in most of our characters, which mirrors the flaw in her own life. Surprise.
That's
In
right.
relation to this, I'm gonna just steel man the Molyneux position in relation to the book because I think it fits perfectly. So one example he would raise would be if somebody has abusive parents, there's this notion that you should remain associated with them because there's some sort of biological connection between the two of you, which somehow circumvents the necessity for having and maintaining a certain standard of morality with one another. So he would say if that problem is unsolvable and it's just damaging your life, you should remove yourself from it. So when you look at Hank Rearden, I think Molyneux comes from the whole Rand thing, or from the objectivist standpoint. It's possible that things like this probably inspired some of these takes. But in Hank Rearden's scenario, that would probably be evident. Why are you associating with them? With Dagny, it's obvious that she's associating with all these second-handers because it's related to her work, probably inescapable to her. But why is Hank Rearden maintaining this relationship? It's obvious he shouldn't.
One thing I wanted to comment on was just the fact that we see these relationships manifest in bad families or bad romance in Rand's novels, and I think the reason for it is literally just because I think it's the most prominent way in which people come to these bad senses of life.
100%, yeah. I mean, if at home you're treated a certain way, how self-assertive are you? How much self-esteem will you have when you carry yourself out into the rest of the world? Whether it be your occupation, the friendships you make, whatever. What standard of conduct will you allow people to have with you if you had a terrible childhood?
It almost seems miraculous to me that Hank Rearden has accomplished what he has with this group of people around him. I think that is actually the most, I guess, fictional part of Rand's novels to me, where you have these people being able to overcome all of the bad impositions of a sense of life around them. Of course, it's not impossible for a normal human, but it's rare.
But I think that's an interesting contrast from Dagny, who came from a successful family involved in this railroad industry. She was kind of dare I say, the objectivist, it's an objectivist sin here, but dare I say, it was almost like it was her destiny to manifest anyways. All of these things were in line, and she knew from the beginning, I'm going to do that. Whereas Hank Rearden evidently comes from a far more dysfunctional family. it seems that Dagny had virtuous characters to look around or to look up to.
Of course, Jim did not get this same thing from his family, so that's what stops it from being looking like destiny, right?
Well, with
There's
Hank Reardon, there's also his backstory that he's going through in his mind while he's walking home. We see like that one instance where he's at his desk and he can't move a muscle and he's just completely like existentially exhausted. He can't carry on living almost. Like that doesn't come from nowhere. So I think his situation has taken its toll and he's pulled himself back from the brink several times.
But why does he maintain them? Why does he keep them in his life? I mean, this will obviously be explained later in the story, but I am curious about your guys' takes. Why does he do that?
I think he just he can't understand what their motivations even are. Like he assumes that like, wow, this charity thing for my brother, it must be the same as this Reardon metal is to me. You know, he just can't even conceive of alternative parasitic motivations.
Yeah, for
Which is a similar
Why
thing
do you-
to Dagny, it seems. It seems she also can't quite grasp why people would, you know, not act in proper ways.
Why do you think Rand writes characters that don't understand how the Sloth live? Because she certainly did understand, and I think the good people she looked to in life understood how bad meant psychology.
Yeah, she it's evident she understands their psychology on like a deep level. Like the statements that she comes up with from these characters, their dialogue is so spot on with that collection of bad philosophies. She is it's you would have thought she was raised amongst a bunch of second-handers and like moochers and whatnot. She did
Scruffy
it really
Soviet
well
Union.
with Keating. It's true. she she did it well with Peter Keating. She did it well with Tui, and those are two different kinds of second-handers. She did it really well with Wynand, and she's again portraying it on a more like family level, which is another take. I mean, those were different relationships that I just described from the Fountainhead, whereas this is much more interpersonal. She's very good at understanding the psychology of evil, which is one of the reasons just to throw back this point, I love Tui's speech. She just genuinely understands the psychology and the philosophy of evil. When she did the Tui speech, it was perfect.
Yeah,
so it's interesting to see her apply it here.
I would say the reason why she depicts characters like this who can't understand the motivations of the second-handers is because I think that's a real tendency people fall into. Like, I know that I have, for many times, I've just completely not understood how like arguments are not getting through to people. It's like are you like a different species or something? Like I'm laying this case out very clearly here, and you're just not understanding. I just don't get how on earth you wouldn't understand what I'm saying. You know, I think that is a real thing that occurs where you just can't grasp how on earth
Also,
a person
like,
would think the same way.
I think we're like passing for like introduction, or not the introduction, with like the introduction to his family, and like the leech's mother, their wife. There's also I believe it's his friend that's visiting. I think his name is Phil, or was that his yeah.
His friend was
But,
something larger.
Laser, wasn't it?
Sorry? Philip is his brother.
But so then wasn't there a
Other guy
friend
that was there too?
Yeah, the other guy's
Paul
Larkin. Paul.
Yeah, with Paul.
Lark, there you go.
Doesn't Paul he says something along the lines of like, "Oh yeah, you're doing great. You know, they don't stand you." But he says it off to the side, right? Like he's right, but he isn't willing to say it to the people in the same, like, he isn't willing to acknowledge it in front of Hank's mother and the rest of his family. He only acknowledges this specific to Hank because he sees something objectionable, but he doesn't say anything about it right away for fear of being ostracized. And I think it says a lot that, like, the person that isn't willing to say anything about it is also introduced at the same time these three people that are doing the bad thing being held.
Yeah.
You know what, Zulu, you reinforced my thought that I was talking about earlier, that Eddie Willers and Hank are examples of people who have a philosophy, but it's not fully understood. They haven't organized their hierarchy of values. So for that reason, this would fall into like that description that Rand says of, you either consciously or unconsciously integrate your philosophy. And if you don't consciously integrate it, how are you supposed to discern from bad philosophies? How are you supposed to analyze a bad philosophy if you don't even fully understand your own? Like, he could have a virtuous philosophy. He certainly is a man of virtue, but he doesn't understand the nature of their vices. He doesn't understand. It literally says he didn't understand how they could love him when they don't love him for the things he desires to be loved for. He doesn't understand the nature of the difference between his virtues and their vices. He doesn't. He hasn't consciously integrated it. That's the best way I can articulate that right now.
That actually makes sense, and I think it applies to the rest of Rand's heroes. They don't have a conscious philosophy.
Wait, you said the rest of Rand's heroes?
Not all of them, but a good amount. I assume based on, or Rourke didn't quite have that, but
Yeah,
at least
the book,
they
you
don't
get
have.
to hear Rourke talk it out a little more.
Sorry, what?
Oh, I actually made this point like in one of the book club meetings about Rourke. He lives his philosophy, but it's only kind of parsed out in segments that he actually speaks it. It isn't until towards maybe close to the end of the book where you start getting him to really open up on philosophy, and it's like, oh, Howard Rourke, the architect and the philosopher. He actually does know it. He consciously is aware of his beliefs and his hierarchy of values and his philosophy.
Got
I
it.
think the answer to the question, which is why do Rand's heroes start out ignorant of psychology and the philosophy of their opponents or the people holding them back or getting in their way, or just the people opposite of them. To say it precisely, it's a storytelling choice. So I think she chose that because having them learn over time rather than having all the answers straight away mirrors the process that the reader is going through of picking up these ideas and slowly integrating them through the course of the novel, and also as a drive for the plot.
For sure, you're spot on. I would just double down on it and say that she likes to depict the consequences of people's actions, often harshly, and I think that's another thing of what she's doing here, showing well, if you haven't consciously integrated your philosophy and you can't discern these issues I just described, it functions the way you described too. But I think she's evidently trying to portray to the reader, this is what happens. This is what happens if you don't do this. This is what happens if you do this. Like we talked about at the end of the Fountainhead, all the recapitulations of these characters, the consequences are heavy for some of them, and the positive consequences are great for the others. It is a storytelling device, as you said, but it's functioning to really demonstrate why these are virtues, why these are vices.
I suppose Does anyone want to engage in any wild speculation about who John Galt is? Just with zero information.
Let's see. He has a speech later or something. I'd
So he can
assume
talk.
he.
So he can talk. We know that much.
I'd assume he has some. He's some high position, maybe, because he would. I would assume this speech is broadcasted somewhere. So he have to have the ability to communicate with a lot of these prominent people.
Yeah, I'm thinking he could be the Halley guy, or maybe the guy who was whistling Halley.
This is funny. Like years ago, the first time I tried reading the book, I actually had no idea about the story at all. Like I didn't know John Galt was an actual character, and I thought it was just like a catchphrase to indicate something that I couldn't. Maybe it wasn't articulated well for the longest time. Well, I shouldn't say the longest time because I eventually kind of had some spoilers when I decided to read it years later. But when I first engaged the story, I thought it was just like a saying, like just a weird saying, abstract saying.
Because that is the way it's presented early on. Oh, sorry.
I think he is maybe my prediction is that he's gonna be like some sort of character that has like maybe an author that like everyone knows the name of but doesn't know anything about, like an author or something like that, where it's a common name where he's done something of note, but it's just unknown who the hell he is.
Which is the same as Halley. Therefore, I'm correct.
I have something I'd love to show you guys. So the Richard Halley theme, Ayn Rand actually had that like an actual piece of music in mind as she wrote the story.
Oh, nice. What was it, Rachmaninoff or something?
No, it's not Rachmaninoff. It's a Russian composer from like, man, I want to say it was the 1700s, but I'm going to post it for you guys right now. It's a beautiful piece of music. It was in an opera. However, I'm trying to type and talk at the same time. It was from an opera, but the opera is not as enjoyable to me, at least, as when I hear the version I'm going to post, because it's been turned to just like an orchestral rendition, per se. Oh my god, these Russian words are hard to remember before I keep scrolling back and forth. I'm looking at it on Spotify and trying to get a YouTube link, but these Russian words are not native to me. Okay, here it is. This is beautiful. Look, this is going to sound hilarious, but I get a very epic and inspiring feeling from starting my morning. I don't do this every morning, but every once in a while, I'll listen to this at the beginning of my day, and before I begin work, and maybe I'm having coffee or something, as I'm prepping my mind for engaging in my work, and it's awesome. I'm surrounded by all this like Ayn Rand stuff. I got the poster from the John Galt speech right next to me, and I like to listen to that before I actually get my day started. I'm posting the link though. It's super epic. It's super romantic. There's a very romantic feeling to it. Although I actually don't think this was in the romantic period of music, so it's kind of interesting. But there's a very romantic feeling about it. It's very epic, and it's uplifting. You can understand the heroism that she was extrapolating from this piece of music. Oddly enough, it's actually like a love theme, if I'm not mistaken.
I haven't heard of this composer. So I'm very interested in this because that paragraph where Rand is describing the music, and actually even more so than that, the paragraph where Dagny is thinking like, what was it? Oh, his previous symphonies had like premonitions of this, or like a note here or there, but it wasn't integrated, it wasn't complete, and this is complete. That's exactly the kind of thing that I'm going for and trying to understand.
And this gives you this. I wish I could actually tie what it is I get from like listening to this and understanding that this was the Halley theme. It kind of feels like the theme of the book. it corresponds to the book very well. And there are like lyrics to it, but without the lyrics alone, I mean, just the melody that's being played that the lyrics would have sang, it's very man, how do you tie this into concrete? It's very difficult for me. Dude, it's just epic and it's romantic. I'll just leave it at that. It's epic and it's romantic, and it gives it a different understanding. It gives a feeling associated with the book, which actually they do touch on later. Now I think about it, maybe I'll be able to expand on this later in the book. But it's interesting that she was listening to this and imagining this when writing this book and referencing this theme. It corresponds perfectly. It's hard to articulate because again, this is like an aesthetic thing.
I can articulate it. I have the exact opposite feeling. Everything is horrible. It's horrible. It's tacky. It's over the top. Too much.
We're just in chapter 2. It gets worse from here.
Did you mean the song or the book?
Oh yeah, wait,
both,
sorry.
either.
I thought you were talking about the book. Which one were you referring to?
I'm just kidding. Go on.
Just curious. I know you were joking. Were you talking about the book or the song? Because I know you actually probably would understand the wording or the title.
I was joking about both. Go on.
Gotcha.
Chapter
But,
1
yeah,
is
I'll leave
called
it at
the theme. So what do you think? What do you think of the title of chapter 1? What does it refer to?
Oh,
Probably refers to the theme.
Theme of what, though?
Well, you might ask who. You may as well ask who's John Galt.
Fair enough.
I think it refers to a few things. I think it refers to the feeling that she's trying to articulate from this, I don't want to say hopeless universe, right? Like, as we've already identified, it's a decaying society, or these characters are around morally bankrupt people, and things aren't looking too good for them. So she's articulating that, and I think that would be one way of interpreting the word theme. And then I think there's a reason that piece of music appears. I think that is related to the title, the theme, as well.
Yeah, it's a theme
I
song.
think it relates to
suppose.
the fact that when she wrote the Fountainhead, she was obsessed with expressing a very pure idea, and so she had no time for pomp or grandiosity or any of that sort. She was just pouring everything into the text and trying to express the characters as cleanly as possible, and did a marvelous job. But by the time she started writing the Atlas Shrugged, she already had a following. She was more famous, and so she was writing. The book has good qualities, but I believe it's mired, at least at first glance, with these sort of grandiose labels, like a Ben Garrison cartoon. It says, this is like the enemy is labeled the enemy, or the swamp. It literally says the swamp, and it like has the label on it. And the government, is the government. And so, no, your job is to draw a cartoon. You're supposed to represent stuff that people know about, and so the labels are almost unnecessary. And I think she suffers from a little bit of that. I think the book still has a lot to offer. I'm enjoying reading it, but that first and those titles are a bit. I don't like them as much.
Yeah,
So you don't like the titles? Oh, I'm sorry. What were you gonna say, Nye?
is it just the titles, or is there something else in the text that you think is like the Ben Garrison effect?
I think that there's a little bit like the we first encounter outsider opinions. Like it's there's like a brief encounter with people that are journalists and some like the two commentators that we see on the train.
Oh yeah, those guys.
And those, they're like so the instant encounter is with the most blunt and brutal caricature that you only get towards the end of the book. Only when you like initially, so this is the brilliance of the Fountainhead. Initially, all the evil people, so quote unquote evil or lost people, or like people in with tragic outcomes, they seem appealing. They seem very realistic. They seem like they're good natured. Like they're trying to just live their life, and get the good stuff. And yet they're making these imperceptible mistakes, then grow out to devour them towards the end of the book, where they become the caricature. Whereas here, you immediately get the caricature, and so it appears a bit less convincing to me, at least, if examined in isolation from everything else. And yet the book excels where towards the second chapter, where you have moments where you have a single character that gets examined, it's actually better. But then with the family interaction, you get back to the caricatures again. So I'm not a fan of that, of like that immediate immersion that occurs in this book. It's a bit more on the nose.
Like,
You know what, Casimir?
Sorry, I could
Go ahead,
maybe steelman Rand here, if my job as an objectivist is to do that. I feel like,
Filthy Randian.
Yes, I feel like, we don't need, because we've already had the book, which is The Fountainhead, which goes over the sort of the fall from grace, the inevitable consequences of adopting these philosophies. So I'm not sure, maybe she is trying to do the same thing in this book, but I mean, at least with what you're analyzing there, it seems like that isn't the point. So do we need to sully whatever the point of the book is going to be with this completely separate sort of thread you could have? Like, would we want The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged in one book? Like, that might get a little confused.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I'll take
So
the
I think-
criticism, but I'll take the
Wait.
criticism, but I think
Can
there's
I
still a
can I
problem
build
here.
on his thing really quick, Casimir?
No, go ahead.
I actually was going to say something very similar. To me it seems evident that when you read Atlas Shrugged, it's almost like a necessary requirement to have read The Fountainhead, because it equips you with all the tools to understand Atlas Shrugged right off the bat. As I said, they introduce these characters and they depict their vices immediately, whereas obviously they're going to get entire like stories, but whereas with The Fountainhead, I would say it inched its way slower per character arc, whereas immediately you're just presented philosophy in this book. It assumes you're knowledgeable,
Which is
with
exactly
her
why it's less
philosophy.
impactful and less powerful than in the first book. Exactly. This is why, because it doesn't sneak in. Because it doesn't sneak in on like it doesn't build logical premises, and so and this is the problem that in society, when you talk to people, most of them don't understand what the problem is. They have no understanding. Well, I want to be altruistic. I just want to help other people. What's the problem with that? I just want to sacrifice myself to others. It's so innocent. It's so, and in their entire life, they're coddled into this line of thinking. And imagine if you show up to them with this shock therapy, where you say, no, caricature, no, this is bad. Everything you think is the opposite. We should be more selfish. And their conception of selfishness is like the demonized version that they've been slowly, gradually educated into absolutely despising. You immediately flag yourself as their enemy. Their rational thinking shuts down, and they believe that you're like a deceiver and you're trying to caricature them, even if the caricature sort of vaguely matches reality. And so that's why I agree it shouldn't be Fountainhead 2.0, but also I reject the notion that it should be required reading. Each work of art should have some independence. And while you need a certain language to understand it, you need, let's say, English. Maybe you even need the language of Rand's writing to understand it. Maybe you even need a little bit of understanding of objectivism. A good book would be more okay. So, what is the maybe for you to visualize it? A good the preferable style for objectivists in terms of visual art is realism/romanticism. And in realism/romanticism, it is like an idealized presentation of real life. It's still real. There might be a character striking a heroic pose, but it's a real human character. It's not like an alien or some kind of Superman. But it's also not a caricature. And bad people are also depicted as real people. That's why they're evil, not because they're alien or something, or they're like some devil. It is part of humanity. It's like failure of rationality that's within everybody. You have the potential to become an evil guy. and that understanding is also depicted through the art. And so in Fountainhead, we had a more honest depiction of that. And here, I'm saying that it starts out where these characters, their snide remarks and everything else about them, they could have been a little bit toned down, a little bit more realistic in color, and their introduction could have been a little bit more gradual and perhaps a little bit more personal. Maybe we should have, a character of a journalist or a character of a commentator that doesn't understand. Instead, we have these, immediately we have heroes and neutrals and enemies, like in the video game.
Hear me out, Casimir. I'm with you. Like it does start off abrasive, and again, I do think it is because she had already put the Fountainhead out, so it assumes something.
You're repeating it, but it's not an excuse.
No,
it's like saying
I'm with you on like the fact that
you have to watch, Star Wars chapter, the first ever released, in order to watch the second one and the third one. And the answer is no. Yeah, they start with a little bit of exposition every time with like the floating text down the screen. But even without them, you would have characters and they would start building up.
I'm with you. Like each piece of art should be able to be examined as a unit. Maybe, I don't know. I'm back and forth about that, to be honest, and that might be an objective sin too. But yeah, it starts off abrasive, but I think what strengthens that abrasiveness, or maybe justifies it, is that at least in Hank Rearden's depiction, that dysfunctional family, that's not like super far disconnected from like many humans' experiences.
Sure.
You could actually just depict that immediately without having to go through these long character arcs and explaining the consequences of following a set of vices and a set of virtues. Whereas in the Fountainhead, obviously it's meant to really wind that out and get that out. Whereas here, yeah, I don't think it's going to be that unfamiliar to many readers. I think a lot of readers are very familiar with what a dysfunctional family looks like.
It was still too much on the nose. It's like everything is it's like it was a decidedly and intentionally sharp contrast between the unspoken camaraderie that he encounters at his work, where they just nod at each other basically with the coworkers, and they're expressing joy through a smile, the knowing smile about what they enjoy, and then the loneliness of going back, the chosen loneliness, and then the family that just drones on about inconsequential things, and it's sort of like a burden, and it's hard to even read through because of how despicable they all are. It's an intentional contrast, but the problem with establishing such a harsh contrast is it also appears unrealistic. If she would have taken the time to introduce them one at a time and sneak in their poison more gradually, it would have been perhaps more impactful in my mind.
So I disagree with everybody here. I think Atlas Shrugged does not require the Fountainhead whatsoever. If you start with Atlas Shrugged, you're not. There's nothing that like you're missing in order to understand the story. The Fountainhead might give you like a head start on some stuff, but you can pick it all up from Atlas Shrugged itself. But I think what you said, Casimir, that the Rearden family, that whole scene was hard to read. I think that tells you what you need to know. Like, what is the purpose of all these characters? What are they here to do in the context of writing a story? Are they here to be foils? Because it's like in the Fountainhead, Peter Keating is a foil for Howard Rourke, so we get to know each one, and as the story progresses, we start to see like a better dimension. Like we see more dimensions of them, and we start to get a clear picture of what are the essential differences and what the concepts are, what goes with what goes together and what goes apart. But here, like, take Dagny. We don't need James Taggart to be a foil for Dagny. Dagny establishes herself completely independently in the train scene, and I don't think you would say that the engineers there maybe was a bit simplistic, but that's not like a Ben Garrison painting evil over those engineers. So she establishes her character right there. So what's the purpose of the scene with James Taggart? Why is James Taggart doing what he's doing? Why is Reardon's family doing what they're doing? I think they're there to evoke a response, like to draw out an understanding of the main characters themselves. I think the villains in these two chapters are completely inconsequential. They don't matter. They're only there not even to be foils to understand our characters, but to evoke an empathetic response almost for how our characters are dealing with them.
Yes, but that still keeps them on the level of a caricature where they're not even characters, they're just like background noise. And then it raises a question: how did somebody as straightforward as Reardon at establishing his business, his main operation, and his passion, how is he also so incompetent at ordering his own house? And I think, yeah, it's realistic for people to be that way. Their entire passion is in one direction, and they're missing everything that's going on around them. And yet, I think part of this caricature fails because it also holds him blameless. Whereas he is like that party dinner or like that party scene is established by him as well. It's there because he tolerates this type of stuff, because he has abandoned his family for years after, because he was not building the type of relationships that where he would come back into warmth and understanding. Instead, he comes back into like a bunch of aliens. And the question isn't raised in the book. Well, how come this amazing character has a bunch of aliens living in his home, calling themselves his family?
I mean, does
I'm
every
satisfied
question
with
need to
that
be raised?
response because, yeah, I think Casimir, you're right on the money there. That's exactly what you should be thinking.
Zulu had something to say.
Sorry, yeah, no, I was just gonna say, like we don't need to have every single thing analyzed. I mean, first two chapters, and maybe not even at all. Like we don't have to know, like it could just be a different story than the Fountainhead. We don't need to go through the same steps. It's certainly not within the first few chapters.
Yeah, and it's definitely, we're definitely going to see these characters interact much more and see these philosophies unfold for sure. But I was going to say we're having a three-way Mexican standoff here, but actually, Naya, I think I'm with you. I don't necessarily believe. I think you've convinced me in what you said, that I don't necessarily believe that the Fountainhead is a prerequisite, but I do believe it equips you with the analytical tools to understand this a little more off the bat. And I think it's super interesting that Atlas Shrugged is a very popular book for people who aren't even objectivists. You can like just Google the celebrities that cite Ayn Rand or like Atlas Shrugged, and they're just like odd characters. Like Angelina Jolie read Atlas Shrugged, and it's like really odd that like these people jumped right in. Well, I guess maybe I shouldn't word it that way because I guess I agree that the Fountainhead is not a prerequisite, but again, I do think it equips you with the analytical tools to understand the nature of altruism, the nature of these characters' vices. It's just really weird though that like people do jump straight into Atlas Shrugged, which I think is a massive disservice to do. But I would agree with you. It's not a prerequisite. I think it definitely helps you to get into Atlas Shrugged though if you read the Fountainhead.
I would say you should read Opar first. I'm crazy.
Read what? Repeat.
Opar, Objectivism and Philosophy of Ayn Rand. That's just
Opar. Yeah.
yeah. I just like.
I don't think that's like a. I don't think that's crazy. The first book I read was The Virtue of Selfishness. So as soon as I got into the Fountainhead, I thought I was even more equipped because the Fountainhead is a fictional story that has to draw out the philosophy, whereas it's explicitly stated in her nonfiction. So I felt like I was actually, I should stop saying I felt, I thought I was a little more equipped to actually analyze the Fountainhead coming from her nonfiction, which was obviously written after her fiction. But I mean, it helped me definitely get into it.
I think both are definitely important for a full understanding. You need to understand the explicit philosophy, and you also need to have it in concrete form with the art.
The reason I was going to say, I think you should read Opar last after you've read the novels. It's precisely because it gives you like an explicit formula for this stuff. It's out in the open. Whereas the novels, like 90% of the reason to read the novels is to enjoy reading them. It's like go on the journey, going in without knowing anything, and be amazed and be shifted in how you think about things. And yeah, you won't be able to analyze it as well, but I don't know, like the magic for me in these first two chapters is looking through Eddie Willer's eyes and seeing this decaying twilight of humanity, seeing the oak tree hollowed out, and then being on the train with Dagny and having this engine of purpose, or being in the home of Hank Reardon. And one of these lines really hit home for me. It was as he's like slipping into this despair of this conversation, he suddenly gets this thought of, or it's not a thought, it's like an urge of, he felt an urge to reassert his sense of existence. It's like the people around him are literally snuffing him out, like snuffing out the source of his life, and he has to reassert himself in that moment. And then he gets up and he starts moving again. So that is what I think the chapters are setting out to do.
You know what? I'm going to try and connect this because I don't have it fully articulated in my head. Somebody used the word, Double A was here, and he used the term sense of life. That to me is something I am a little maybe understudied on. I don't know how to describe it. I don't know if enough objectivists actually use that term, as especially obviously it applies to aesthetics, and in the discussion of this book, it would apply perfectly. But she's trying to establish a sense of life. So sometimes it is abrasive, but that's how she sets that sense of life. Are we all familiar with that term, by the way?
I am.
No.
Casimir, do you guys know what that term is? Sense of life?
You lose gone for the moment.
Casimir, are you familiar with that term?
I don't remember.
Nai, do you think you could explain it better than me? If you have a good understanding of it, you could probably say it, but I'll give it a shot if not.
Not off the top of my head. I would have to think about it.
So, to my understanding, the way she describes sense of life is prior to every human, prior to their ability to even comprehend the concept of metaphysics, has an emotional association with reality, and that develops as you grow. And you can see it in artists depict when they make a piece of music, a piece of art. You get the understanding of their sense of life, their emotional response to their metaphysical. How would you word it? It's the relationship between their emotions and I don't think she ties the word metaphysical in there, but it would be your relationship to reality, which forms at a very young age and obviously changes according to how events occur in your life. I think she's establishing different senses of life here, and I think that actually even further justifies the abrasiveness of the second chapter, especially with Hank Reardon. The first chapter has some, tense moments. You got like Jim Taggart, who's just clearly annoying and just a dirty soul, But it's far more abrasive. At least to me, it was. I thought it was far more abrasive to just hear his family interacting with him. That was kind of grueling. I think it's establishing a sense of life, or maybe multiple senses of life. You need to have this emotional reaction to that current situation. But I have the Ayn Rand lexicon. I'll read verbatim what sense of life means. It's a concept that, like I said, I don't know if a lot of objectivists talk about. I certainly hear it sometimes. And it's a very interesting one in the way that it relates to art, especially, because she believes that art depicts your sense of life.
Yeah, so me and Double A were talking about the term, or we were using it yesterday because he watched the movie Whiplash, which I recommended to him, and we were talking about how in that movie the director is conveying this idea of greatness requires torment and loneliness. So like the path to greatness, you've got to go through torture, basically, and it was intense the way it was portrayed. So that was the director's sense of life, and
Yep.
the viewer can respond to that either by saying, yes, this is what I believe, this I resonate with that, or they can be completely put off by it, or maybe something in between saying, well, kind of, like there's something right about that, but not quite. And those are the different reactions people could have to the movie.
Yeah, no, I think that's you're getting at it for sure. It's crazy. I didn't think Sense of Life had 3 pages in this book, but the first paragraph's really the only important. Well, I'm not going to say that. It's important for this discussion. I'll say a sense of life is a preconceptual equivalent of metaphysics, an emotional, subconsciously integrated appraisal of man and of existence. And she is just aiming with the scope and really nailing that. The last sentence is, it sets the nature of a man's emotional responses and the essence of his character. And there's more that's, I think, really good. Actually, I'll read the next sentence too. I'm sorry. Long before he is old enough to grasp such a concept as metaphysics, man makes choices, forms value judgments, experiences emotions, and acquires a certain implicit view of life. For this discussion, I'll leave it at that. But does that get it across?
I understand it. I don't know. You were asking Casimir, right? Or is it Zulu?
Yeah, I guess everybody here, but if you understand it, that's good. Casimir, what do you make of that?
Sorry, I didn't.
Oh my god. Sorry, I keep muting myself because like the siding of my houses are being redone and they're just like banging nails into the wall. What did you say, Casimir?
Can you link in me what you read?
Yeah, actually, I'll just post a link from the Ayn Rand lexicon.
Inksplat, you joined kind of late. So have you read Atlas Shrugged, or is this your first time reading it?
Yeah, so it's my first time reading it. And I haven't read The Fountainhead, so I'm just going in somewhat blind.
Okay. No,
Well,
that's good, in my opinion. You're very
yeah,
welcome to contribute here.
I've listened to some explicit objectivism though, so not completely.
that certainly helps you. But I don't know if you were here for this part of the conversation. We were kind of going back and forth about whether the Fountainhead's a prerequisite or not.
Before you go into our conversation, let's ask some questions. What did you think about the first 2 chapters?
I honestly, I really loved them. I thought they were pretty sick. I didn't really feel what did you call it? On the nose. It didn't really feel on the nose for me, because to me it felt like, I mean, it was like really seeing kind of the philosophy, or rather the opponents of Ayn Rand's philosophy in the characters. So to me, it was, I honestly liked it being kind of explicit in the characters and such. Yeah, because it just made it like almost more explicit than the philosophy.
Casimir debunked.
Yeah, totally.
Right.
I enjoy it. I love it. Keep going.
Yeah, so they boomed with feelings instead of facts, so not really that good of a debunk. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I just enjoyed.
Good.
Zulu, are you back?
Yes, I am.
Okay, I don't know if you heard the part where we were talking about sense of life. Did you hear any of that?
I heard the beginnings of it. I think you were asking something like, what is sense of life?
Yeah, so like I read the definition. I was just saying that I think in relation to the whole abrasiveness of the presentation for the first 2 chapters that Casimir is getting at, I think what Rand is doing is portraying multiple senses of life, and it's almost necessary to do that. It's necessary to be as harsh to establish these characters' sense of life. You get a good understanding of their character immediately. The whole sense of life thing, I'm not I don't actually. I haven't read a lot of objectivist texts that reference it. I've only seen Rand reference it a certain amount of times. Maybe I need to read a couple more books. I don't know. I've read a couple of. I've read a decent amount of her books, and I still don't find that term used very often. But
it's used mostly within the aesthetics.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Because like,
but does that make sense? The point I'm making.
What point was that?
That she's establishing the sense of life for all these characters, and so that almost that justifies the abrasiveness of Hank Rearden's family or the abrasiveness of Jim Taggart.
Yeah, I suppose so. Because like a sense of life is sort of like an emotional metaphysics, you could say. Like it's your implicit metaphysics, at least. What you're feeling about the world, your metaphysical value judgments.
Yeah, and that is portrayed in really your actions, though, your thoughts, your statements, your artwork, all of that.
And yeah, that is like the connection to the aesthetics, is that an artwork is objectifying a certain sense of life.
Yeah.
Another part that I had a strong response to was the end of chapter 1. We already talked about it somewhat with Owen Kellogg, the guy who's quitting the company. And the first time I read that part, I didn't quite know why, but that was like almost a tragedy to me. It came off very tragic. Like there's something lost here, that something that could have been, and it's gone forever now. I don't know if you guys felt the same way.
Yeah, I sort of was mirroring Dagny when she was like just asking like why to herself, but like trailing off like, why is he doing this? It doesn't seem to make much sense.
Sorry, Naya, which character were you referencing there?
Owen Kellogg, the worker who quit company right when Dagny was about to promote him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was a little confused about him, because it felt like every character up to that point, they were kind of all heading into the same like general direction. But this one character was like, we didn't really get like his implicit philosophy or what he was thinking to make this choice. Kind of like bam smack in the middle we get. This was kind of confusing to me, that section.
Yeah, I think part of it actually is that how much they trust each other. Like there's very carefully chosen sentences where they each ask each other, like, will you take my word for it? And this is right after the whole conversation with James Taggart, where he's like, whose word are you taking? Whose judgment are you going on? So we get that side of it, but then we get these two people who understand each other and who have admiration for each other, like value each other as human beings. And when they say, I'll take your word for it, that is a heavy phrase. It's like, it's a very weighty thing. It's not to be taken lightly in the context of what we just read. And the fact that they say that, and yet he's not willing to explain himself, it's created an effect for sure.
What other? I have some stuff I just want to bring up that's unrelated to the book, so I don't want to throw this discussion out the window. But are there any other important points you guys would like to bring up?
I can't think of anything apart from just like the metaphor of like the railroads being like veins and the oil refinery being like the heart pumping out all this blood. I enjoyed that.
Oh, that was a really cool description, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That's kind of what I was trying to describe. Is now that we have a concrete here in the Fountainhead, I was referencing these moments where she does that, where she explains things in a, I think you can call it abstract way. That is It's super cool, and I really appreciate it. It's interesting that she even is able to do that. I don't know where she would have learned that. I guess she's a big fan of Victor Hugo, and I've never read Hugo. Maybe he helped inform her aesthetic comparisons, for lack of a better term.
Like an
But I
analogy,
think
I
it's super
suppose,
cool.
or a metaphor.
There is one other character that we
Yeah.
haven't talked about, which is Ellis Wyatt, who is the oil guy. So he like discovered fracking or something close to it, because fracking wasn't invented yet when she wrote this book. So it's a little bit of predicting the future on Rand's part there. So he's going to all these old oil wells that have completely been tapped out and running dry, and he's reviving them and starting a whole new seed of industry is sprung up from Colorado around these oil wells. And that's the center of the conflict between her and James, who are fighting over whether to revive the Rio Norte line, which goes from I think Wyoming down to New Mexico. So it runs all along the west near the Rockies, versus the railroad in Mexico, which is about to be nationalized, according to Dagny.
Yes, I think James Taggart said something like, how are we supposed to, you know, foresee something like that? It's not fair, you know. Nobody can blame us that we didn't see it coming.
To pedal off of that, I'm gonna speak a little ahead of what we're reading right now. I'm not gonna spoil anything. I think it's entirely obvious, and Nye, you should understand, seeing as you've read more. You said like Rand was kind of predicting of the future in a sense. I think this book does a lot of that. It does a really good job of explaining regulatory capture. I'm sure you guys have actually heard that being associated with this book. She does a really good job at like depicting the process for regulatory capture and these stupid philosophies that go along with it. We'll see a lot of, I think, Rand predicting the future very well. I mean, granted, like regulatory capture existed when she was alive too, right? But I think she does a really good job at explaining the philosophy of it, or the philosophies that go behind it. And it'll be really cool to see that panel out. I'm very excited for those discussions, for when people start, proposing certain laws and regulations and stuff.
Yeah, I was posting in the book club chat these two sets of things relating to the AI people. So there's Sam Altman of OpenAI, who, if you haven't heard, who's just fired from the company by the board. So they're going to have to get a new CEO. So I was relating two screenshots of what they're saying to James Taggart, Hank Rearden, and some of the themes so far. I don't really want to explain the whole thing right now, because it's you're kind of meant to piece it together on your own, but I just like putting that out there, so you can read that and ponder over it if you'd like.
I saw that, but I'm not very familiar with this, like the situation. If you have any articles you'd like to share, please do.
I don't think you have to be familiar with it. It's just the words they're using in their own statements is what I'm highlighting.
Gotcha.
Yeah, because I'm not trying to say it's a one-to-one, like Sam Altman is a corrupt James Taggart who's got no redeeming qualities. I'm just drawing what are they saying, and how does that relate to what we are reading.
Yeah, it's always nice to see, connect these things to actual real-world events. I think that's, it helps you ground it more fully, make it more realistic, in Casimir's words. Does anybody else have anything to bring up, or should we end the stream and whatnot? Chat, I suppose.
Let's see. Oh, we had we were talking about Paul Larkin, and yeah, I'm trying to avoid connecting any dots for people who haven't connected them already, but I'll just state what the text stated, which was Paul Larkin was talking about an ominous threat from Washington. He was asking, he said the reason for his visit was he was trying to warn Reardon about making sure he had somebody in Washington who's protecting him from the legislation and whatnot.
Mhm.
But he's kind of cryptic about it.
Yeah, I suppose we've seen that with Dagny saying the Mexican lines being nationalized, and he's got like his lobbyist in Washington, and he was saying that he needs to concern himself with like public opinion more. So there's definitely
that was the
something
thing,
building
is
to it.
he's trying to get across the human element, as James Taggart put it.
Mhm.
Although I think in this case, it's not a moral claim like James Taggart was making. It's more of you've got to get the people on your side, or it's not going to turn out well. But Reardon does not understand, really. He doesn't care to even think about public opinion.
Pardon me.
Yeah, I found that really interesting actually, because when I was first reading it, as like only with baby understanding of Ayn Rand, for me the question what for is still I'm selling. He's just like, I'm doing my part. To me, it seems right now that that's kind of Ayn Rand's philosophy would be. But I guess we'll find out throughout the book whose side she's on.
Yeah, other than that, I had a note about the symbolism of the chain, which is of chapter 2. So that refers to the physical object that Reardon gave the trophy for his wife. But then at the end of the chapter, he explicitly calls the symbolism back to our attention by saying, how ironic that it's a chain. This is the chain that he keeps us all bound by. So we've got some symbolism work there, although perhaps not in alignment with how she's portraying it.
What do you think? Do you think she's reading an incorrect like symbolism in there? Do you think there's a more appropriate symbolism?
Well, I have all the answers. What do you think?
I suppose a chain is a thing of industry. I mean, just explicitly, this is like a very nice gift. It's like, hey, this is like the new brilliant metal I'm bringing to you. The first pouring of the first, thing of Reardon metal. But I'm not sure what it means to have it in the shape of a chain. But I suppose we'll maybe see more about that.
To me, the fact of seeing it as a chain, kind of, it seems like she has some like preconceptions, some like
Hank Reardon?
no, his wife.
Oh,
Right,
Lillian.
his wife. Right, and seeing it as a chain is kind of like reading stuff into things that aren't really there. Seems to me that she's just it's kind of whim worship in a way.
What do you mean by that?
Just the fact of seeing this chain, which is, what is it? It's just a gift, but reading into it things because it is similar to something else, like a chain of a prisoner. I mean, it seems making a correlation which shouldn't really be done. So it has no reason to be done.
Yeah, I see your point, that like in the context of these characters, Lillian is sort of trying to I don't know how you'd describe it, but like reaching for a metaphor in order to characterize Hank in a certain light. There's a couple of times she does that in the chapter. Yeah. I think that's just about all my notes, Zulu. Do you have any other topics to address, or I suppose anyone you can bring up any topics?
I just want to mention that there was a lot of content to analyze in these first two chapters. This discussion might have been similar in length, possibly shorter than some of the other book club discussions about the Fountainhead, but there's just so much in here. So it's awesome.
Yes, but
Indeed.
yeah, I suppose if that's all the topics, I suppose we could end it there.
Yeah, I think we should leave our discussion about how we're going to conquer the world from the awful communists to the next chapter. Tune in.
Yes, thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it as well.
Yeah, that's the stream ended now.